Another edition here of Getting There with Gaz, and joining me now, one of my pals who I've met through my media journey. Before I say who it is, we'll start every episode like we always do. Like my dad was my Little League coach and Pop Warner football coach, the circle of learning who the teammates are. You tell us who you are, what you'd like to be called during this podcast.
Hi, guys. My name is Jason Romano, and I am a Capital Region native. And I guess I'm an author and now the director of media for Sports Spectrum. So there you go.
Yes, perfect. For those who don't know, tell us a little bit about where you grew up. What was the first job you wanted as a kid? And if that same job was the same job you wanted when you were 18.
Oh, great question. I grew up in Ravena, New York. So for those that may not know Ravena, it's about 12 miles south of Albany. But if it's a lot of Capital Region people tuning in, they know exactly where Ravena is. Maybe they've never been there because it's tiny, but they know where it is. Ravena Queens Selkirk High School was where I went, RCS, class of 1991. So this is going to be 30 years. Unbelievable 30 years that I graduated high school there. But it was a blast. Grew up there. When I was a kid, I don't know if I had a job that I really wanted. I mean, I guess a pro athlete was probably what I was looking at because I was a sports nut even as far back as 7, 8, 9 years old. So I would think maybe being a sports, professional athlete of some sort at that age. Once I got to high school, you mentioned 18. I realized pretty quickly that pro sports wasn't in my future, guys. So the next best thing was to talk about it. And that's when I decided, as I was making my college, decisions and where to go and what to major in and what to do, that the broadcasting world might be the next best thing. And thankfully, this is now, 20 plus years that I've been in broadcasting and I've been able to make a career out of it.
See, it's interesting you bring up the broadcasting because so many people I've talked to already all had the same thing as a kid: pro athlete, pro athlete, pro athlete. And few really found like someone they looked up to in the broadcasting business at a young age. Did you at some point say, you know what, that's the host, that's the radio talk show personality, whoever that, okay, if I'm going to step into broadcasting, this is somebody who's kind of sparking that interest in that craft?
Well, from a local perspective, the Albany native people will like this name, or actually two names. So I remember going when I was 14 or 15 years old to the Bob McNamara High School basketball camp. And it was in Albany. I think it was at Colony High School. I'm not sure. But I remember going as like a 9th or 10th grader. And I was like, I wonder if Bob McNamara is going to make an appearance. Like, this is the guy on Channel 13 that I get my sports updates from. And he did. He made an appearance. He was there, I think, every day. It was a 5-day camp that was like a day camp. It wasn't an overnight deal. And I went to it. And so him, and then Roger Weiland was just coming up at that point. But big board sports was a thing. And that was, from a local perspective, I think if I was identifying two guys that I really was a fan of, two guys that I was looking to maybe emulate, because people think I wanted to work at ESPN, and listen, who doesn't? But I mean, I didn't dream big enough, I guess. I was thinking Channel 13, WMYT, doing the local sports at 11 o'clock would have been my dream job when I was 15, 16 years old. So I guess those two, certainly on much higher levels, people like Howard Cosell come to mind, people like Chris Berman come to mind. I'm watching Sunday NFL primetime every week. Those kind of guys, Al Michaels, like the legends, the big names, those are guys that I watched and emulated. I loved NFL Sundays as a kid with Pat Summerall and John Madden on the CBS games back then. And then on the NBC games was usually Dick Enberg and Merlin Olsen. Monday night was Al Michaels, and I mentioned Howard Cosell and, Dan Deerdorf and Frank Gifford. So those guys from a national perspective, sure, like Bob Costas and Vin Scully and all those big names. But like, I never thought that there would be a time where my path on a much smaller level would cross with any of those people's paths. But thankfully for a lot of years it did.
Yes, it did. So before we get to how it ends up happening, which is a wild story in itself, take us to now 18-year-old Jason Romano. Maybe you go on to college, maybe you don't, maybe you get your first job. Take us through what happens when you turn 18, and if you do go to school, what school, and what do you start to do during that time?
Yeah. So at 18, first of all, I'm a knucklehead. I don't know anything. I love when you talk to an 18-year-old and they think they know everything. Man, we know, they know, and we knew nothing at 18. I mean, we were just trying to figure it out. I will say the one thing I did know was that I wanted to work in sports broadcasting. That was a certain. And so, I grew up in Ravena. It was a small town. I don't think I allowed myself to dream enough. I was just talking about this to my brother a couple days ago, that when we were 18, I think we always thought that we couldn't go as far as college. Like, I didn't think, oh, I could just go to California or Florida, where I am now as I'm talking to you. Places like this were so far away that I wanted to stay local. And I think our family dynamic kind of kept it that way. So I didn't feel like I could ever go into like a Syracuse New School of Broadcast, Newhouse School
Right.
type of setting. It was a private school, didn't have a ton of money, probably would have got some financial aid. But community college, I grew up in a broken home, and my mom was working 3 jobs, and we had an opportunity to get some financial aid. And state school / community college was where I really kind of settled with, for lack of a better word. But I don't regret it because of the experience I got. And I ended up going to Cayuga Community College, which is out in Auburn, New York, about, I don't know, an hour, maybe a little less west of Syracuse and about an hour east of Rochester. It's exit 40 on the New York State Thruway. And I went there because it was one of the only 2-year community college in the state of New York that had a broadcasting program. I remember looking at Herkimer Community College, which is out near Utica. I remember looking at some other community colleges that were closer, like Hudson Valley and Columbia Green, but they didn't have broadcasting programs. And I was like dead set, spot on going to learn about this broadcasting thing, even at 18. So I went to Cayuga. I got my associate's degree, but I was on the radio station, guys, the second day, I think, on campus. And I was still 17 at that time, by the way. I getting ready to turn 18. So you talk about hands-on experience, even though I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I got thrown right into the fire at 17, 18 years old, being able to learn about broadcasting. And it was amazing. It was amazing.
How that fast? That doesn't happen second day. How did it happen?
Well, I remember the first day I got there, and you take your classes and you go in, then I was like, where's the radio station? Because my dream was to work in radio. So I went and I found the radio station. I went upstairs and I said to the person who was in charge, because remember, it's a 2-year school. So even the one in charge is like 19 and a sophomore.
Right.
So the program director said, yeah, if you want to do a radio show, just, your major's in broadcasting, you put your name in the hat, and we'll see if we can find a spot for you to do a show. And the next day they said, hey, we found a spot for you. It's on, I think it was Saturday nights. And I was doing a show called, you have to come up with a cool radio DJ name, guys. So I came up with the Emperor because I'm a big Star Wars fan. And I thought, the Emperor is a cool DJ name. So we came up with a show called The Emperor's Throne on WDWN Win 89 FM in 1991, hosted by yours truly, the Emperor. And it was terrible. I mean, I was hosting a show where I talked for like 30 seconds and all I was doing was teeing up songs like a DJ would. And we were still playing records way back then, and CDs were just becoming a thing. And I played a bunch of hard rock songs, like late 80s, early 90s, metal, hair band songs, hard rock songs. But I loved it. And then what happened, though, was the radio station was affiliated with the basketball team at Cayuga. And my roommate was my high school buddy, Eddie Nieves, who was my best man in my wedding. And we went to Cayuga together, and he played on the basketball team as a freshman. And so I got a connection with the coach and with someone else, and I got to do play-by-play and sometimes color commentary because they broadcasted these community college basketball games on the local TV station and radio station of the community college that I went to. So like I said, 2-3 months in, I'm wearing a headset like this, trying to call a Cayuga Community College basketball game. Again, not knowing what I'm doing. All I'm doing is emulating whatever I thought I saw on TV. But it was an amazing experience. And yeah, you're 18. Like, I'm like, this is college? This is awesome. Like, this is exactly what I want to do for the rest of my life.
Just out of curiosity, I feel like I know the answer, but just for fun thought of, you were calling yourself in the broadcast Jason Romano, right?
Yes,
Not
yes.
the Emperor calling the basketball games.
God, thank you for clarification there. Yeah, this wasn't welcome to Cayuga Community College basketball. I am the Emperor, and I'm joined by Mike Ray today. No, it wasn't any of that.
Okay,
it was my real name. Thank you, though.
Okay.
What a disaster that would have been, by the way, if I went with the Emperor.
Right. I wish kind of now you opened the show with what do you want to be called? It would have been a great segue 9 minutes later into the podcast. Now I'll figure out why I'm calling you that. But anyways, we move on to your next stop. Like you mentioned, 2-year community college there. Is there a 4-year stop? And what happens after that?
Yeah, so I took 2 years off. I graduated from the community college when I was 19, so I was super young, and I didn't really have a lot of mentors. I didn't do a ton of internships, and I didn't really. I don't think even the community college at that time, that may change certainly today, but at that time, their internship or next level was to go to a 4-year school. There wasn't a place, I think, when you graduated with your 2-year degree to kind of set you up for a job or a career. At least that's what I felt. So I came back home to Albany and Ravena, and I started working at Albany Medical Center. And I tried to get a job in broadcasting, but didn't really know how. Again, didn't know anybody. So I went home, went back and lived with my mom, and worked at Albany Medical Center full time. And had a job at 20 years old. Then I moved out and got my own apartment and thought, this is amazing at 20 years old, living on your own. But then one day, my roommate, Eddie, who I just referred to, who I went to Cayuga with, him and I had gotten an apartment together in Albany, and we were living over by the hospital area. And one day we were just at home, and he said, do you want to work at the hospital for the rest of your life? And he was working at a bank. And I said, well, do you want to work at a bank for the rest of your life? And we both said, no. And so I said, well, what do you want to do? And he said, I want to work in PR. And he looked at me, he goes, what do you want to do? I said, I want to work in broadcasting. I said, I think we both need to go back to school. So we're 20 years old, and he chose Southern Vermont College and went back to college and played basketball there and got his degree in PR. And I found SUNY New Paltz, again, state school. New Paltz is about an hour south of Albany. They have a really good media and broadcasting program. Went there, did my 4 years, or my final 2 years to get my 4-year degree, my bachelor's, and graduated in 97 from New Paltz. And kind of did the same thing that I did at Cayuga, except this time I got to host a sports talk show. And that was really cool for me. And I did not call myself the emperor. I was just me by that point. But I was a little older. I was 21 when I went back to college for my 4-year degree and graduated at almost 23 years old, and was just at that point, I think, a little more mature. The 4-year school certainly had more placement and opportunities to do internships. And when I graduated, I still didn't have a job. But when I graduated, I had a little bit more direction and desire and drive to get a job in this business, no matter what. And if it meant doing it for free for a while, if it meant making $5 an hour and working 3 other jobs, I didn't care. I wanted to work in this business, and I was prepared to do it.
I feel like that's the first lesson too. That we're kind of learning here that for some young broadcasters, even if they do that community college route, you mentioned it. You're 19 years old. You didn't have tape. You didn't have a demo reel. You didn't really know how to put a resume together. I think that's the big thing, that whether you're community college, whether you're coming out of high school, whether you're a 4-year spot, get that motivation of, I need something to give people. I need experience. Like you said, maybe you're not getting paid. Maybe it's an internship, but something to put down and say, this is how I'm going to get better from the time I step foot in a college setting, maybe when I'm 18 to the time I graduate in 23. It seemed like you were an extra motivated Jason Romano at that point when you had that break from broadcasting.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, I honestly didn't know what I was doing when I was 19. And if I look back, it worked out the way it was supposed to work out, and I'm thankful for my career. But I probably wouldn't have taken those 2 years off. If I was advising 19-year-old Jason, I would have said, just keep going, man. Like, don't stop. Keep it rolling. Keep going. Find that 4-year school. But, for some reason, I was 19. I thought just getting any degree was an accomplishment, and I stopped for a little bit. But then, thankfully, I had that conversation, and I went back, because if I didn't go back, I don't know if I ever would have pursued that broadcasting journey. I probably would have just settled into a job that paid okay and got an apartment and lived on my own and eventually got married and had kids. But I would not have pursued what I wanted to do. And so I'm thankful that I went back to school, got my degree from New Paltz, and then really started my broadcasting journey right after that.
All right, so let's do it. You're out, New Paltz, starting the journey. What is it? Is it a first job? Are you trying to apply anywhere? Are you getting some phone calls back? What are you applying for? This is where the excitement starts. Now we see, okay, I'm a professional. I'm about to make some money doing something that I want.
Well, here's the thing. I wish this story was like this amazing, success story right after graduating college. It's hard to get a job in this business. First of all, you know that, and I know that. When I think I was about a month away from graduating, and this is going back to the late 90s here, I put together a resume cassette tape, and I made like 40 copies of this cassette tape of my talk show host work, of my play-by-play work. And it was, again, probably terrible, but I was like, all right, I want to be on the air. So I applied, or I didn't even apply. I couldn't find the job openings to apply for. I just said, I'm going to send this cassette to 40 radio stations east of the Mississippi. I wasn't prepared to go all the way out West Coast and start my life over, but I said, if I could stay east of the Mississippi, if any of those stations call me, and there were mostly sports talk radio stations, this is 1997, I would have gone. I really would have. I didn't get one reply from any of them.
Oh,
Oh for
oh,
40. I mean, that's like the worst
man.
baseball slump you could get into. And I got an 0 for 40 slump going. So when I got out of college, I graduated, I went back home to Albany and I said, all right, I know Albany at that time didn't have they didn't really have any sports talk show stations, I don't think, in 97. But I knew that they had broadcasting, opportunities. So I went back to Albany and I put together my resume, not a tape, just a resume. And one day, about 2 weeks after graduation in very early June, my brother and I got in the car and we went and I said, all right, here's a list of the 10 radio stations in this area or whatever it was, and TV stations. I said, I'm going to drive to each of these places and I'm going to hand them my resume at the front desk and tell them I will do anything. And I won't ask for a dime. And I'm not even looking for a job. I just want to learn, almost like an internship,
Right.
but post-grad internship. And the first place I went to was WGY. And I think it was 1 Washington Square at that time in Albany, New York. And I went in there and I handed my resume to the lady at the front desk. And she stopped and she said, I don't know who you are. Tell me more about yourself. And she's just the receptionist. I'm not trying to demean her job, but she stopped and took an interest in me for just a second. And I told her my deal. I said, I just graduated college and I really have a passion to work in broadcasting. And, so I'm just kind of going around and handing my resume and letting people know of my interest. Well, something happened there in that conversation because literally an hour later or so, when I got home, there was a message on my answering machine from the promotions director at WGY. And I didn't even know what that role was. Like, I just knew the person who was on air. Like, I knew
Right.
Don Weeks, who was the legend, right, on WGY. And this lady calls and she says, I got your resume from the lady at the front desk. I wish I could remember her name. And she said, he seemed very nice. So I'd like you to come in and we can have a chat. So before I even got to go to the other radio stations, guys, she calls me in and we sit down and we have a chat. And basically she had no real job to offer, but she said, we're looking for kind of an intern or somebody who's interested in learning, the side of promotions. So again, I didn't know anything about promotions. I really didn't have a desire to work in promotions, which is kind of like PR and marketing, but it was in a radio station. So I said, yes, I didn't care. And the very first job I had, the second day I was there just learning, I dressed up in the Rocky the River Raccoon. So WGY and the River 99.5 were sister stations. I think they still are at that time. And the River had this mascot that was a raccoon. And she's like, I need you to dress up in that raccoon for 2 hours and go to, it was a mall in Saratoga. I can't remember the name of the mall. And just be a mascot for 2 hours. This is in the dead of summer, by the way. And I said, I think I can do that. And so I did it. She paid me $40. So $20 an hour. I was like, that's pretty good money for 1997. And that was the very first job. But then when I came back the next day, I think I told her, I said, is there anything in the broadcasting production world that I can do or learn? And she introduced me to a guy named Tom Parker, who is the program director at WGY. And a kid named Mike Augustinak, who is like 4 or 5 years younger than me. Mikey is now working he's a meteorologist and he worked at WRGB for many years, and now he's out in Minneapolis. But at that time, he was like a 17-year-old kid, whiz kid, who was the executive producer at WGY.
Wow.
And so this 17-year-old kid is showing this 23-year-old kid how to produce and teaching me. And Tom Parker was so nice, the program director, and said, you can learn from Mikey. He could be your guy. So for the next 2 months as a volunteer, I just learned the ropes of how local radio, talk radio worked. I went on remotes, I would board op, I would screen calls, and then a job opened. It was the afternoon show producer for a guy named Mark Williams. So if anybody who's a little bit older than me are listening and remember Mark Williams, he was the afternoon talk show host at WGY, and it was like shock jock type talk. And he said a lot of controversial things to get those ratings, guys.
Yeah, right.
You know how that is. And I applied for the job, not realizing it was to work with him. Not that I didn't have anything against him, but I got it. And I remember when Tom Parker offered me the job, it was in like late August of 97. So about 3 months after college, he said, you know this job doesn't pay much, right? I said, you could tell me it doesn't pay anything and I'd still want it because I want to work in this business badly. He's like, well, you got the job if you want it. And here's the salary. This is it, guys. 15,000, 15,000.
Oh,
That was the salary in 1997. And it was a salary job. That meant no overtime. It wasn't an hourly paid job. And it was a producer, but it was full time. It came with benefits. And I said, I'm in. They could have offered me $1 an hour and I was going to say yes to it. And, then you work your way up to 16,000 after 6 months. And I think by the time I left GY 3 years later, I was up to like 21,000, which still isn't a lot. But I mean, I didn't care about the money. I just wanted to do something that I loved. And I figured the money would eventually come. And that's what happened. That's how I got my first job in broadcasting.
yeah, there you go. And you're getting paid. Like you said, you have the passion for the business. All these good things are happening. You're working in your hometown, which is very rare for a lot of people coming out of college looking for that first job. Usually you have to move. But sure enough, now you just mentioned this. You leave WGY. Where are you going after WGY?
Well, that's the thing. I went to ESPN and and that's, people will ask me all the time about that being a dream job. I told you earlier, I didn't dream big enough, but one day, first of all, in 1998, this is 6 months after I started my job at WGY. I'm perusing the internet one day. This is the early days of the internet. And I came across a website called allaccess.com. You might know it. It's a radio sort of industry type website. It still exists. I went to look a couple weeks ago and it's still there. But it also had job openings on there. And, when you're young, you're curious what's out there. And all of a sudden, a job for ESPN Radio Network pops up for a producer. This job in 1998, you needed 6 years of network radio experience and a 4-year degree. And I said, I have 6 months of local radio experience. But you know what? It's the internet. I can hide behind, the internet. So I'm just going to apply online and submit my resume and just pretend like nothing happened. Well, guess what? They called me and they said, come on out to Bristol, Connecticut, and let's interview. We'd love to talk to you. And I was shocked. I mean, shocked that they called me because I did not have the experience. And going in, I thought, you know what? They're probably not going to hire me, but I'm going to get to go to ESPN. So I went out there. My buddy John Wimmer and I went and took the drive. He came with me. I went in and I interviewed with one person. His name was Len Weiner. Len was a program director at ESPN Radio. And he sat down. The very first thing Len said to me is, you're not going to get this job. And I'm like,
wow.
It's great to meet you too, Len. But he said, you were really, I don't know why, but something about you piqued our interest. And I know that you're not going to get this job, but I wanted to talk to you just to see what you were like and what your experiences were like. I said, well, I don't have a lot of experience. I'm still starting out 6 months in. He goes, do you have a girlfriend? I said, I do. He goes, are you prepared to just leave all that for this? I said, I don't know. I said, I don't think so. He goes, well, then that's why you're not ready. And you also don't have the experience. He said, but I want you to do something. I want you to stay in touch. And in a couple of years, if something opens up, maybe there's a different opportunity. Well, it was like he was, seeing into my future, guys, because 2 years later, now that I had almost 3 years of experience at WGY, 2 years later, in March of 2000, I'm on the website again, same website, and the same job opens up again, ESPN radio producer. And I apply again. And by this time, I'm married to that girlfriend, who is now my wife, Dawn. And I remember Dawn telling me, I know that your job is a unique one. It may take you different places. So, I'm in on this with you. But then I think at that point, she wasn't fully expecting it to happen when it did. But the job opened up. I applied for it. Same people. They called me again. Come on out to ESPN. I didn't know anybody. Again, I wish I could tell you that I had all these connections. I had nothing other than my trip a couple years earlier.
Which is amazing, by the way, because a lot of people probably hearing this are like, he just went to a website and applied. There's no way. He's got to have an uncle, an aunt, a cousin. Nothing.
I'm from Ravena, New York, guys. I told you, there's a whole lot there. So my connections were like my friends from high school. There isn't a radio station in there. There's not. So I didn't have any connections other than having applied in 98, them calling me out. And that's what shocked me, that they called me, because it honestly was just applying on the website and I get a call from somebody to say, come out here. That's it. It wasn't any connections. Now I tell people that's very rare. in this business, you know this as well, that it
Yeah.
is hard to get a job in this business if you don't at least have a connection somewhere. And I didn't have a connection anywhere, but in 2000, they called me, I applied, I went and interviewed with 4 different people this time, and it came down to me and one other person. They ended up hiring us both. And I started July 18th of 2000 as a producer at ESPN Radio in Bristol, Connecticut.
Amazing story. Before we move on to the ESPN stuff, what happens when you're in Bristol?
Yeah.
Just those interviews alone, though, like people are probably hearing this thing. My dream job is to work for ESPN, which I'm sure you've heard so many times over close to 2 decades now. But
Yeah.
that interview process, how intimidated are you? Do you feel like you have any advice for somebody listening who maybe one day is going to get interviewed by ESPN? Anything you learned from that interview process besides maybe wear extra deodorant because you might be sweating or something?
Well, definitely wear extra deodorant. Definitely wear a suit, because the first time I don't think I wore a suit, and the second time I definitely did. I didn't know. Yeah, again, I'm young, and I'm just so naive at 23 years old. I'm 6 months out of college. I didn't really. I mean, I hope that I was at least presentable in that interview. But in 2000, it was a full suit, the only suit I owned. I remember being really nervous the second time. The first time, I think it was all gravy. Like if the story stopped at me just getting a call from ESPN to go interview with them, it'd be the greatest story ever. And I'd tell my grandkids just that, even if I never worked there, because that's how much I loved ESPN as a kid and loved sports. The fact that they would even call me was amazing, right?
Yes.
So in 2000, when they're calling me back a second time, that's where I'm starting to think, oh, this is serious here. And I'm interviewing with 4 people, and now I'm really nervous. And I remember the one interview of the 4 that I did was with a guy named Eric Schoenfeld, who was the general manager of ESPN Radio at that time. And I get in his office, and I'm sitting there, and I'm like, this is like 3 levels above who I'm going to report to if I get this job. But it's still one of the head guys.
Right.
He was super, super nice and fun, but he was the one guy that started quizzing me on sports and asking me like current event questions just to see if I had any sports knowledge. And I was like really nervous because I considered myself one of these guys who knew a lot about sports. And I'm like, if I fail this, I'm done. I'm toast, because it's ESPN. People got to know what they're talking about if you're going to work there. Thankfully, I passed, I guess. I don't remember any questions, but I do remember him coming up with some very, very generalized questions, like who's the best catcher in baseball right now? And I'm like, oh man, let me think. It's 2000. Mike Piazza, because he can hit home runs and he can command a game. He might not have the best arm throwing a second. I had to make sure that I was saying things that sounded like I knew what I was talking about. But that was really intimidating and nerve-wracking. And I will say, even after that interview process, they had to call me back twice. First, to tell me that they were really interested in me. The second was to tell me that it was between me and one other person for this job. So that's like a blessing and a curse to know that information. And then finally, the third time, they said, we want to hire you because we like you and the other person. So we're going to hire you both. By the way, the other person was a guy named Paul Paps, who is Paulie, Dan Patrick's producer on the Dan Patrick Show. Him and I hired the same day at ESPN Radio and worked together for about 3 years. But that's how I got the job. It was crazy. And it was very, very nerve-wracking to go through that interview process the second time, because this is where I actually thought I was a real candidate. The first time I was just like, just so glad to be there. Like, show me where ESPN and SportsCenter are done and I'm good. The second time I was like, I want to work here. And this is an opportunity for a brand new career and, an opportunity like nobody else could ever get,
And you're there. They always talk about this in the music industry, right? Like now you're in the building of what a lot of music people say is, okay, making a hit signal is easy. Having the second or third album be successful is much more difficult, because now you're there and it's one of these opportunities where everybody wants your job. Lack of a better phrase, everyone's gunning for you because you know how competitive it is to get to ESPN. What are you doing? Because I know you from the Mike and Mike show, and maybe some people listening know you from the Mike and Mike show. Take us through how you end up being known as the guy on one of the all-time great sports talk shows of all time, Mike and Mike.
Well, crazy enough, it's funny, I tell people this. My 17-year career at ESPN, I worked on Mike and Mike for 2 years.
Wow.
But so people think you were on Mike and Mike for 17 years. I was on for 2 years. The very first year of my journey at ESPN. So I got to ESPN on July 18th, 2000. I'll never forget the day. And 2 days later, as I was training and kind of onboarding at ESPN and learning about ESPN Radio, the booker of Mike and Mike had been around for about 6 months at that point, The booker left to go to Fox Sports Radio and move out to California. So I just happened to be sitting in the area where Len Weiner, the program director, the guy I mentioned earlier from ESPN Radio, and Pete Genesini, who is now overseeing podcasts and higher up at ESPN, he's sitting on the other side, and I'm just kind of innocently sitting at this cubicle. And those two are talking about how they're going to have to find a booker for ESPN's Mike and Mike show in the morning. And so I just happened to be there, and Len looks at me, he goes, Romano, didn't you do some booking when you were at your local radio station? I said, yeah, I was doing it all. When you're a producer at a local radio station, you book the guests, you run the board, you screen the calls, you gather all the information, you do all the editing, you make the promos, you do everything. He's like, why don't you give this a try and, go work with Pete and work on Mike and Mike and book some guests? And I'm like,
It's unbelievable.
okay. And again, at that point in 2000, Mike and Mike was not what it was now. It was a morning show on a national network, and people knew who Golick was. Probably a few people knew who Mike Greenberg was, but at that point, they weren't nearly what they were when I left 17 years later. But I knew, for me personally, it wasn't even about being a Mike and Mike. It was just better hours for my job. And, because I could work Sunday through Thursday and have Friday and Saturday off and work during the day and not have to work at night. You know how this is when you're first starting. You work nights, you work weekends. And all of a sudden I had this job where I didn't have to work nights or weekends anymore, except for Sundays during the NFL season. And so I said, yeah, let's go. Let's try it. And after about a year of doing it, I was ready to try something else because I wanted to be a producer. Silly me, right? I wanted to be an actual producer, not just a booker. So they took me off Mike and Mike and put me on a show called Game Night, which was the 2 to 11 ESPN radio show Monday through Friday. And so I got to run the show and kind of direct it and work with the hosts and really just be more of a producer, like leading the show. Whereas with Mike and Mike initially, I was just a booker. I was kind of the third producer in the ranking, I guess, or gamut of Mike and Mike show. Now, looking back, maybe that wasn't the wisest move, because if I had stayed on Mike and Mike, who knows what could have happened, because that show just ended up blowing up. So go throughout my career, I ended up as a talent booker on the TV side, leaving radio in 2003. I worked on the television side for 9 years. Then I went and did social media and digital media for the last 5 years of my career at ESPN. And that's where I ended up back on Mike and Mike in 2016, working on this show again 15 years later, running their digital and social media, of all things. And by the time I had gotten back to this show, there was like 25 people working on it. And it was everything that you would have remembered being one of the great shows of all time, sports talk shows, especially in the morning. And, it was on TV and radio and digital and social and podcasts. Everything was happening at Mike and Mike at that point. And the high profile, awareness of that show by so many, and I was on the show when I was working in the studio. Mike and Mike would reference my name so often. That's when I started to realize, people, know who I am because I'm on the show now, weirdly enough. And I wasn't even really on it. I was just mentioned a few times every day. And then when I left in 2017 to pursue what I'm doing now, people associated me with Mike and Mike because that was my last job at ESPN. So it was my first job and my last job. But really, it only spans about 2 years, guys.
As much as I want to dive deeper into these ESPN stories, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to hit a pause here on this. Just if people like listening to the stories chronologically, there's a good chance in months from now, I might get you back on and tell ESPN stories. So chronologically listening, we're going to pause here and just go back and listen to Jason Romano, ESPN stories, hopefully a few months from now down the line of the podcast. I'm going to jump ahead because you teased it a little bit there.
Yeah.
To you leaving ESPN, because somebody just heard that and they're like, wait a second. This guy's been here for 17 years and he's leaving ESPN. Take us through the decision of why you left ESPN, and then we'll dive into where you're sitting right now as we're taping this a few days away from the Super Bowl.
Yeah, so 2016 is actually when I first started thinking about leaving ESPN, 2015, 2016. And it wasn't that I wanted to leave ESPN. My faith's a real important part of my life. And I started thinking, purposeful work. I'm in my early 40s. Do I want to be a lifer at ESPN? Work till, I'm 60 years old. And, it's funny thinking back now, seeing everything that's happened with all the layoffs. I don't know if I would even still be there if I wanted to be there because of everything that happened. But I just felt like if I'm going to make a pivot, if I'm going to pursue something different, this is the time to at least be open to do that. And all I did, guys, was really just build a bunch of relationships with people outside of ESPN and let them know that in my heart, in my spirit, kind of maybe thinking I was being called away from ESPN to do something else. Again, I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know where I was going. But through that, I met a guy named Steve Stenstrom, who's a former NFL quarterback. He was a quarterback with the 49ers and the Bears. He played college ball at Stanford with Bill Walsh in the early 90s. And Steve oversees a ministry, media ministry, as I call it, called Sports Spectrum. And he and I just built a relationship and started talking and having conversations. And I said, this kind of makes sense here. We're talking about sports and everything that I've done for 17 years. But now it's intersecting with the world of faith and talking about and telling the stories of athletes and coaches. And for many of them, the most important thing in their life is their faith. So maybe we can marry these two together with Sports Spectrum. And he offered me this position and this opportunity to not only be a producer and kind of build up the platform. So that was exciting. But then he said to me, you should host a podcast. I want you to host a podcast. And that's where I got really excited, guys, because that goes back to college.
Right.
And as a college kid, that's what I wanted to do, was be on air and host a show. And ESPN, obviously, I loved my time there, but I was never going to be hosting a show there. I was a producer and that was my job. And, I would have had to leave ESPN at a younger age to go build myself up if I was ever going to try and really pursue this on-air thing. So when I got this opportunity, I honestly didn't think I was worthy enough or good enough to even host anything, but he gave me this opportunity. And that's what really got me intrigued, was to start a podcast and do interviews with athletes and coaches about their faith, but also about sports and about life and family and all of these other topics that you would talk about. And so through that and opportunities to, run this company and sort of build it up, I took a leap of faith, for lack of a better word, because I took a pay cut and, it was a contract job and there were no benefits and all of that. And I left. I made the hard, very difficult choice to leave in February, just about 4 years ago this month, February of 2017. And I'm so glad that I did, now that I look back, not just because of all that's transpired with the layoffs at ESPN. I have no ill will towards ESPN at all. I loved my time there. I loved the people I met there, but it was time for me. And now I look back after 4 years and I see this perfect plan that aligned, that I couldn't see happening with me working on Sports Spectrum, but also writing books and speaking and, getting to meet you guys and do all these cool opportunities, like be here in Tampa, Florida this week to hang out at the Super Bowl. So it's pretty cool that God has opened up a ton of doors for me that I could never have imagined when I was still at ESPN.
You felt this strong connection to your faith. You decided to invest in yourself. You decided, hey, throughout my career, I've done a lot of things where I feel confident, although it's a little risk because it's something I've never done before and there's some nerves going into it. I'm still going to make this. Now, you mentioned you're in Tampa right now. For those who don't know, you're at Radio Row. Can you just kind of take your camera around? Is that allowed now? I don't even know what the rules are with the COVID-19 protocols. Can we see what it looks like right now in the Tampa setting for Super Bowl 55?
Well, I don't know if it's allowed, but I'll show you. First of all, by the way, I have a mask right here for people
very
wondering.
good.
But
Okay.
we are social distance. You can see there's nobody next to me as I move out of the way. Like, that's the next closest Radio Row table, and that's probably 30 feet away, maybe.
For perspective, because Jason and I have covered
Look
these
at how
events.
empty it is.
Right.
There's nobody.
Now, look, some people may have never seen this before. Usually how it's set up, I guess the best case I can say is like a lunchroom in school, right? Like there's just people right on top of each other. This is not
Table
normal.
next to table. Table next
Yes.
to table next to table. Obviously, you and I have been parts of Radio Row the last few years, where we've hung out and done some interviews together. And this year, I mean, there's half of the Radio Row tables, they said, from last year. So there's 42 tables. They're all socially distanced. It's hard to see. I don't know if you can see behind me, but there's like plexiglass right in the middle that separates each little seat. So, technically, if you want to, kind of like if you go to a bank or you go to a grocery store, it has the glass, the plastic glass in front of you to kind of protect you from, breathing in or whatever. So it's definitely, but I feel real safe here. And I feel like, they did a good job on still being able to have this. When a lot of people I know didn't send their crews to come down, they've done a really good job. It feels really safe. I don't know who we're going to get, by the way, down here.
Right.
There's very few. I think there's like 7 radio stations as I look, while I'm talking to you, or media companies that are sitting in tables doing things. 7. out of 41 tables.
Man.
And I was told by a few people that you're not going to see more than 10 to 12 players come through this week. And hundreds and hundreds of people come through Radio Row every year for interviews. This year, there might not be more than 20. So we'll have to see. But we wanted to come down and see what it was like. And, honestly, if I'm getting really technical inside info, we didn't want to lose our Radio Row spot for next year.
Right.
And so we came down this year to be here because we really needed that spot next year as well. And in the future, because we're small. Sports Spectrum is not big. And we wanted to still have this opportunity to do this every year. And we're being safe. We're socially distancing. We're wearing the masks, and we're doing what we have to do. And we're still getting a lot of interviews this week for Sports Spectrum. Just many of them are over Zoom or over StreamYard or whatever streaming device that you use. But we're getting a lot of remote interviews than just the in-person stuff that we've gotten in the past.
Well, I know you're super busy, so I'll move really quick for these last 5 questions. A few Super Bowl themed and a few about your career and everything else. So we just talked on Radio Row. Favorite part of Radio Row?
So this year, we can't use this year as the best, although this year the favorite part is that nobody's around you and you can work independently and you got nobody to bother you. I think my favorite part is seeing the obscure celebrity on Radio Row. So you're not surprised if you see Barry Sanders or Jerry Rice or Emmett Smith walking Radio Row. Last year I remember even being in Miami, you guys were there, and I remember kind of seeing some of those, NFL players, and you're like, that's pretty cool. That's Emmett. I love the Cowboys, and that's my guy. But then you see like the Big Show last year from the WWE, and you see, I think Martha Stewart, correct me if I'm wrong, was walking Radio Row last year.
Yes.
And so I'm like, okay, why is Martha Stewart on Radio Row? And so I would try to figure out what was the connection to the NFL or to the Super Bowl. And then you watch the Super Bowl and she's in a commercial and you realize, oh, that was the connection of why she was in Radio Row. Some rappers, Lil Nas, I think, was walking last year as well. And I didn't know who Lil Nas is. That shows you how old and out of touch I was. I'm like, who is that guy? And the people next to me were like, that's Lil Nas. You don't know who that is? I'm like, I don't, sorry. But I learned who Lil Nas is. But he was walking around. So I think my favorite part of Radio Row is seeing the obscure celebrity that you just are so random you wouldn't expect to see them.
Yes, I love that answer. And I just want to add to that quickly. That's also my favorite part. And those celebrities interacting with each other. In Minnesota, I loved watching Dr. Oz interact with Busta Rhymes. Like they've been buddies, chatting it up. I'm like, what is happening in front of me right now?
By the way, Minneapolis was a nightmare because that was like right in the mall. And you want to talk about close quarters and the opposite of what social distancing is today. Minneapolis in 2018 was brutal.
This feels like there's always like a conversation going on each year to Super Bowl. Like, we remember the years of Cam Newton and retirements and all this other. I feel like this in Deflategate, this year it feels like Mahomes the new GOAT. Like this is the passing of the torch game. Is it getting that feel? Do you think like this is the start of, I guess, the torch being handed from Brady to Mahomes?
Well, I felt like, as Brady is the GOAT, and you can't argue that. Mahomes is on his way. I think that kind of is the storyline that you're going to hear a lot of. He's been so good. Like it's hard to watch Pat Mahomes and think, this guy is doing things that no quarterback has ever done. So when you watch him, you could see that discussion. He's got to win on Sunday for that even to be a real discussion, though, to me. If he wins on Sunday, now you have back-to-back Super Bowls. Now you're entering, some high territory here. And the way that he plays and the talent that he has will immediately escalate him to the upper echelons of all-time greats at 25 or 26 years old, whatever he is. But it's too early for that. Like if he's playing at 43 and has won 6 Super Bowls, then we can talk about the new GOAT. But like to me, right outside of Brady, then you got guys like Peyton Manning and Aaron Rodgers, who's still playing at a high level, and guys like that. Joe Montana, obviously, it's going to take a little while for Mahomes for me at least, to get to that level. Even if Mahomes wins this Sunday, he doesn't go above like an Aaron Rodgers or a Peyton Manning to me yet. Like he's got to do it for the next 10 years to be escalated into GOAT category. Now, is he the greatest right now, which isn't GOAT in terms of the greatest of all time? Yeah, he might be. If he wins this year, he probably is. He should be the MVP or a second MVP behind Aaron Rodgers, runner-up. But yeah, he's the best right now, but being the best right now does not make you the best of all time, unfortunately.
Right. Still got a ways to go for sure.
Yeah.
Now, you're there at a neutral site championship game. We saw because of COVID-19 spots becoming neutral site championships. Major League Baseball, NBA, NHL. Do you see that as the future? Would you like to see some of these other professional sports leagues take the path of the Super Bowl and do these type of events?
No, I think no. I mean, it's weird because it's a neutral site, and this year it happens to be Tampa's
Tampa.
home game in their own stadium. So it's weird to even think that. First of all, I think that's the coolest thing, by the way, that Tampa gets to play a home Super Bowl. As a kid, I always thought it would be cool if Dallas or any of these other teams that I watched would play at home in the Super Bowl. It never happened. I think the closest was San Francisco in '84 played in Palo Alto, which, by the way, the Super Bowl was held in Palo Alto and Stanford at their stadium. I think it's still the only, go back, it's one of the smaller stadiums ever for a Super Bowl, but it hasn't happened really since and ever. So I think it's a cool thing, but I would not be, I like the history, the tradition of like the NBA finals, and it's the two, what is it? 2-2-1-1-1
Yes.
format, with home court advantage. Same with, the NHL, same with baseball. I'm a fan of like playing that regular season for a little bit more. Football is one game. Baseball, basketball, hockey, it's a series. And so in that series, you get rewarded a little bit for the home field, and you play a regular season and have it be worth a little bit more. Maybe not in baseball, because it's usually the All-Star game that determines that, which I'm not a big fan of. But I do like the idea of hosting. Like, I went to a National League Championship Series game, and I went to an NBA Finals game in 2010 when Boston hosted the Lakers. And to be at a game in your stadium with 15,000 fans screaming, like, there's nothing like it. So I don't want to see anything change. Once we can get out of COVID here and get back to some fans and kind of some normalcy, I want to see it keep it the way it is.
And I feel like we'll appreciate it more than ever before, those home advantages and home courts and home ice and all that other stuff. Two more quickly here for you. I know you've talked to a lot of people in your career. Is there still one person that you personally want to interview? Doesn't even have to be in sports. Just, I would love to have a 45-minute conversation with this person.
Well, there's a couple. And I tried to do this today. It wouldn't have been a 45-minute conversation, but Tom Brady's a guy who I just would love to ask a question to. And I sat on the media availability today with Tom Brady for 45 minutes, hoping I get to ask him one question. And I was just going to ask him about leadership. I'll tell people what I was going to ask him. I said, what makes a great leader? I would love to hear one of the greatest leaders of all time tell us what makes a great leader. And I was going to ask that question, but I'm low on the totem pole when it comes to media getting a chance to ask a question to Tom Brady, guys. So I didn't get that chance. I did get to ask questions to a couple other players, but it wasn't Tom Brady. But he'd be a guy I think would be fascinating to talk to, or anybody on that level, like where they're so unbelievably good, like Michael Jordan, all of those guys at that level, and what made them tick and what makes them work. But ask them different questions than just, what was it like to win? I listened to all the questions that people were asking Tom Brady, and it was like, compare this Super Bowl to your first one. Have you heard from Bill Belichick this week? What's it like to play against Patrick Mahomes? Like, I get it. Like, the on the field questions need to be asked, but I want to ask him about like parenthood and, leadership and work ethic and, gratitude, just really interesting topics. And I would love to talk to Tom Brady. Certainly my basketball hero is Larry Bird. And speaking of Boston heroes, and I'd probably poop my pants if I got to talk to a half hour with Larry Bird. Not to be so graphic here, guys, but I'm just being honest. Like, that's the guy. I've met all my real sports heroes, thankfully, through my ESPN days, except Larry Bird. And I think if I could sit and talk with him for 30 to 40 minutes, that would be amazing. One non-sports person that I would love to talk to would be Paul McCartney. I'm just a huge Beatles fan, and I think I'm a kind of a Beatles historical nut, and I love reading books about their past and kind of studying what their music and all that they accomplished really in a 7-year period is just incredible. And he's still alive, which is helpful. I would love to get, even 5 minutes with Paul McCartney and ask him 3 questions. It would be incredible.
Well, I was going to go to question 5 and usually let you plug your social medias and where to follow you and what to do. But I'm going to move that up now because
Okay.
I feel like it's a good segue because Daryl Strawberry is your guy. That was your hero growing up. And not only did you get to meet him, you guys have like a relationship now, like professional relationship. So I want to make sure for those who don't know how to follow you on social media, plug that, the book where Daryl's a part of it, and then we'll move on to the final question. I'll let you actually get back to Radio Row work.
Yeah, well, like I said, there's not a lot of people here, so you picked the right time to call me, guys, because
Perfect.
we have a few extra minutes today. But
Nice.
Daryl Strawberry, obviously, he's the other guy. So it was Daryl and Larry Bird were my two guys as kid. Daryl, not only did I get to meet him and hang out with him a couple days at ESPN, but I got to become friends with my sports hero. It's ridiculous that I can call him a friend of mine. He was very gracious to me, though, in offering to write the foreword to my first book. I've written 2 books now. The first one's called Live to Forgive, which is a little more of a serious tone. It's a story about forgiveness, and it's about the broken relationship that I had with my alcoholic father. Daryl had the same situation with his father, and then also struggled with his own substance abuse like my dad did. So Daryl had a real keen connection to me, I think partially because of that relationship that I had with my father, or lack of relationship that I had with him. So he offered his name and wrote the foreword to that book. And so people can check that out. My social medias are just my name, Jason Romano, on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook as well, or my website is just my name, jasonromano.com. But Daryl also lended his voice, I guess, if you want to call it that, or words to my second book to offer an endorsement. The second book, though, is more along the lines of what we've been talking about. It's leadership lessons that I learned from my time at ESPN. And so there's a lot of stories. You talked about ESPN stories. You want ESPN stories? Man, this book, it's called The Uniform of Leadership. It has them, but it's not just stories. It's actually applicable lessons that you can apply into your own life to be a better leader in your sphere of influence, whether you're a coach or a teacher or even just a dad or a mom and you want to be a better leader toward your kids. That's why I wrote this book, was to take all those stories from ESPN, but help kind of implement them into our lives to be better leaders and better people. So that book's out right now too. It's called The Uniform of Leadership.
Get it where all books are sold. Jason gave me a copy. It's awesome. Do yourself a favor and do it. Final question here for you, my friend. I know we've covered it a lot. Best advice on getting to where you are. Best advice for the young broadcasters listening who want to have this type of crazy career like you've had.
I love this question. I get this question. I mean, not this question, but a question about advice quite a bit. And, you know, I can't tell people to do what I did because other than maybe just being sold out on working in this business and not worrying about the money, you know, that's the only thing I can kind of probably transfer over to people today is just say, don't be in this business to make money, be in it because you love it. In fact, whatever job that you want to go after, not just broadcasting, anything. I mean, I'm telling my daughter this right now. Don't try to find a job that just can get a quick fix or make you a lot of money. If you can make a lot of money doing it, great. Find something that you love and that you're passionate about and that you're good at. If you can find what you're passionate about and what you're good at, and you're not going to know what you're good at until you try some things, but find what you're passionate about and what you're good at and try to intersect those together, you are in the sweet spot. And then pursue that, right? So I didn't know if I was good enough to be on air, but I knew I could produce because I was learning the ropes and showing them that I could do it. And then I knew I wanted to be in this broadcasting business. I had a passion for it. And so I found that. And so I tell young people, find your passion, find what you're good at, and try to intersect those and go for it. The other thing I'd say, though, is you can't get a job the way I did. Most people can't. Applying online and waiting for a call just doesn't, unfortunately, work like that in our business. You really need to know people, but you have the greatest inventions known to people right now, known to man in technology and social media to connect with people. I didn't have that when I was coming up out of college. So I didn't know what to do or how to do it. I had to go to the radio station and hand my resume in, you know, to the lady at the front desk. But today you can connect with people all over the world who are doing the job that you want to do someday. And most of the time, those people will take a liking or at least answer a couple questions to you through social media. Take advantage of that. Take advantage of the fact that you can reach out to people, find them and talk to them and build those relationships. And 80% deposit, 20% return. That's the last thing I'll say, guys. 80% deposit. That means don't ask for anything in advance. Just go and ask for their time and to learn, make a deposit into their life. And then when it's time to make the withdrawal, the 20%, you can do that but don't always be about taking. Be about serving, be about giving. And I'm telling you, it'll come back, in a positive way for you.
He is my pal, Jason Romano. Jason, thank you so much for spending this time in a busy week at the Super Bowl, and enjoy, throw a spitball over to the other tables now that they're too far away. Thank you so much for sharing your story, how you got to where you are in your career. We'll talk again soon, my friend.
Thanks, guys. Good to talk to you, buddy.